Welcome to the University of Coruscant. As part of your enrollment here, you have access to the attached HoloNet recording. You've selected a lecture by Dr. Sunny Ravencourt on galactic history. You've selected a lecture by Dr. Sunny Ravencourt on blaster pistols. If you have any questions about this lecture or wish to contact us, please visit hunters.Taught.
Thank you again for such loving applause. I have to say, you guys really know how to make a former holodrama star feel right at home. And really, you must stop with the gestures. The golden statue of me that was left outside my office was far too big for me to put inside. The only place that I could reasonably fit it was in the hallway outside Dean Fontana's office. Oh, I do so love that Rhodian. I hope she doesn't mind the statue. It does take up a bit of room. Also, the painting of myself has mysteriously disappeared from the staff lounge. If any of you know its whereabouts, please let me know. I'd grown rather attached to that glorious battle scene. For today's class, I would like to harken back to one of my old holodramas, a movie where I was on a terrible planet called Tatooine. I was a heroic farmer in a drama called The Last Drop of Death. I'm sure I don't need to explain the plot to any of you, as I imagine you've all seen it multiple times. But the reason I'm bringing it up is that on backwater worlds like that, where farmers are simply trying to defend their land, life can be pretty hard. That is, until you get a blaster pistol. The average farmer cannot fight off raiders with his bare hands. He can't do it with a big stick, and swords require training and skill. But you give the average farmer a blaster pistol and a short range, and now your average raider is thinking twice about his formerly easy target. The invention of the blaster pistol evened the field for defenseless farmers everywhere. I do love a good blaster pistol. I've used so many of these things in the holodramas, all disarmed, of course. They simply wouldn't allow me to do my own stunts that included live blasters. I'm sure my importance was just too great. Their rules were so tight, I was barely allowed around any of the things. But today, I've brought in a whole bunch of excellent examples, all thanks to my Bothan associate. We'll divide up all of these pistols into two main categories. There's my personal favorites, the heavy blaster pistols, and then there's the much smaller holdout blasters. Now, there is a ton of examples in each category, and probably way more categories than I could have made here, but this is a reasonable start. Before we even pick up any blasters, I think it is important to explain to everybody what exactly a blaster blasts. I mean, what comes out of a blaster? Most people would incorrectly refer to them as lasers. They are not lasers. A blaster shoots blaster bolts, which are made of intense plasma energy. And they did this by converting energy-rich gases into a glowing particle beam that could melt through its targets. Now, there's a word in there which I used, which is kind of a big deal. It's particle beam. Because of this, when it hit, it would not only pass tremendous heat, but it would also cause friction with the particles. The amount of friction could vary wildly, but with enough friction, you can really pack a punch and kill even an armored opponent. Plus, because it had friction due to being a particle beam, you could defend against them with magnetic seals or deflector shields. You could even bat one away with a lightsaber, or bat it right back at the person who just fired it. Just yet another reason not to pick fights with Jedi. Okay, let's look at this guy. This, my friends, is a DL-44 heavy blaster pistol. Manufactured as early as 33 BBY by probably the most famous blaster company out there, Blastech. It's got an impressive weight to it, but it still fits very comfortably in my... Oh my god. Oh. I am so sorry. Oh. Wow. Well, I have heard that your species regenerates limbs, right? Is that not you guys? Okay. Why don't you see me after class, and I will definitely get you a few extra signed copies of my holobiography. Wow, where was I? The DL-44, known for its high accuracy and heavy punch, this baby was loved by basically everyone. Smugglers, military, civilians. It's really the answer to the question. And what's the question? Well, it doesn't matter because this only has one answer, and it only needs one answer. You fire this thing once, and that is the end of the conversation. The DL-44 has a maximum range of about 75 meters, which is really a long way, but nobody uses it for that. If you insisted on shooting at that distance, it did come with a scope, which helped, but it's primarily a close-range weapon due to the amount of damage that it can do. You see, the DL-44 had the ability to charge a bolt to twice the power of a normal shot without damaging the blaster when it fired. It has a capacity of 50 shots. 50 shots! That's pretty good when any single one of them will put down most opponents, even the armored ones. And if you somehow went crazy and fired until you were nearly empty, well, at least you were warned. The handle was designed with a pulsing hand grip so that at about 5 rounds left, it'd give you a little pulse and let you know that you were about to be holding an empty blaster. At a very reasonable cost of 750 credits, there's very few drawbacks to the DL-44. But even with all of that, most people bought it because it was so easily customized. The DL-44 was probably most famous as the sidearm of the Rebel Alliance general Han Solo. He grew up on Corellia, which has some pretty tight corners. I imagine that this is exactly the kind of gun which would do very well there. Solo, like so many others, tinkered with his DL-44 a bit and removed the barrel sights, which allowed it to be drawn quicker. In case you're not catching the theme here, most people don't fire this thing more than one shot, and that's pretty true with almost any heavy blaster pistol. It's a pretty big advantage to shoot first. Some interesting facts about the Blastex DL-44. When it first came out, it had a huge appeal to a lot of outlaws and Outer Rim residents for one specific reason. Remember what I said about the friction of blaster bolts? Well, the DL-44 could penetrate Imperial Stormtrooper armor. Naturally, this was a big hit amongst those who were not fans of the Empire. But those people weren't writing the rules at the time. The Empire was. So, the Empire put a lot of restrictions on the purchase of it, which created a bit of a secondary market for blasters that looked a lot like the DL-44, but were toned down a bit. The weapons manufacturing company Merson made a pistol called the Model 57, which is pretty much a straight knockoff. Interestingly enough, the Jedi Luke Skywalker carried that weapon, which I find kind of funny and appropriate given the historical documents about Skywalker and Solo's relationship. Another famous blaster pistol that I'd put in the category of heavy blaster is the DH-17. These were everywhere during their heyday, also around 30 BBY. This particular blaster has a sort of pointed nose like a missile, and it was used by both the Imperials and the Rebels at the time. It was also made by Blastech, but it had an enormous difference from the heavier DL-44. The DH-17 could be fired fully automatic. Now, it would drain all of its power in about 20 seconds, but with fully automatic fire, 20 seconds... Think about that. 20 seconds of fully automatic fire is a long time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. I mean, fully automatic out of a pistol. That's enough time to form a plan on what to do when you're empty. Sustained fire is a very military thing, so it's no real surprise that these were a favorite with the various armies and navies of the day. Now, holdout blasters are a very different game. They were designed to be much smaller, which accomplished a few different goals depending on who you were. There were two main categories, military and civilian. The civilian versions were highly regulated, mostly because they were concealed so easily. Most planets restricted the power of the shots, saying that the goal was to ward off attackers and not become vigilantes. But the ability to conceal the holdout blaster was just too much to resist for a lot of smugglers. And they really loved them, even though they only fired about 6 shots. But the smugglers would dial those things up to get as much power as they could. A great example of the military version of the holdout blaster is the EC-17, made by, guess who, Blastech Industries. Honestly, these guys made a lot of blasters. These blasters were famously carried by Imperial scout troops, and they would hide them right in their boot. And that should really be all that needs to be said for the difference between a holdout blaster and a heavy blaster. The EC-17 had some fun trinkets too, like a pressure grip to allow it to be fired with gloves on, and a super bright light that could also be used as a sort of non-lethal response. But they're small blasters, they're designed to be a last resort or for stealth. One of the prizes of this little collection is a holdout blaster called the Blurg 1120. It was made by a company called Iris Ryloth Defense Tech. Apparently, it was originally registered to a pilot named Hera Syndulla, and this thing had 9 separate firing modes, including a double shot. Why would anybody need 9 separate firing modes? I have no idea, but I really like this thing. It has an almost backwards missile look to it, and I have never been able to find anything like this. In the end, our previously mentioned Han Solo said it best. Here's the quote. If you're gonna have to admit to carrying a blaster pistol, carry 2 and admit to 1. That's pretty awesome. Okay, it is that time again. Questions from the class. Yes, you. Step right up to the microphone, droid. Go ahead.
You mentioned bright lights. What kind of other options did blaster pistols have?
And what is your name, youngling?
It's Blur Lightfire.
Well, thank you so much for your question, Mr. Lightfire. We will be sure to watch your career with great interest. The answer is yes, of course. I personally love the S5, which was used by security on a planet called Naboo. Underneath the barrel is a dart launcher that could fire an anesthetic microdart, a sting charge, or even a grappling hook tip. The grappling hook tip, by the way, is super neat. It has a liquid cable shooter attachment that has enough liquid to form 65 feet of cable, capable of holding up to 1,100 pounds. How awesome is that, Mr. Lightfire?
Pretty awesome.
You're darn right it is. Well, that's it for class, folks. For next class, I want you to bring in a homemade blaster. I'm pretty sure this is going to be okay with Dean Wambata, but I'm just going to check with her sometime this week and let her know that I told you all to do it.
This concludes your selected lecture from the University of Coruscant. For all questions or to contact us, please visit theuniversityofcoruscant.com.